stop slipping, and stop cutting your socks. We have 15 different color options between 3 grip socks and 2 sleeve types. Something for everybody at a price that just makes sense. Available now at puregripsocks.com. This is Nike's entire 2025 AG Pro lineup, where if you regularly play on artificial grass and also want a pair of Nike football boots, you should be considering one of these 3. These are the differences between them, where between these 3 lines, Mercurial, Tiempo, and Phantom, you technically have 5 different options, with the Mercurial of course being available as a mid-cut Superfly 10 or as a low-cut Vapor 16, where there is no premium on the price tag compared to the FG variants, although it must be said that the Mercs have recently undergone a $10 price increase, $295 for the Superfly and $270 for the Vapor, with the same pricing structure being in place for the Phantom 6 Elite, the highs retailing for $295 and the lows going for $270. With the Tiempo Legend 10 Elite only being available in low cut form, this also going up in price by $10 from $240 to $250 in the latest colorways. All boots that, by the way, you can pick up below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes via the links down below. As for the actual AG Pro stud patterns, when you look at them side by side, you'll notice that they share a lot in common. Unlike the FG models where you get blades with the Mercurials, rounded studs with the Tiempos, and then kind of a combination of the two on the Phantom 6. Not the case with the AG Pro variants, because artificial grass is a very different surface where you're not necessarily looking for performance characteristics, you're just looking for a certain type of performance, but perhaps more importantly, safety. And that's because artificial grass is just inherently more dangerous to play on. It's the reason why top clubs and top players refuse to play on an artificial surface. Natural grass is just so much safer. But if that's not an option for you and artificial grass is a surface you're going to be spending a lot of time playing on, investing in an AG specific stud pattern, whether it's Nike or another brand, is well worth it. Not so much for the sake of performance, because literally any studs will cling to an artificial grass playing surface, but more so for the sake of injury prevention, durability, and also the manufacturer's warranty, where if these boots do break on you because artificial grass is such an abrasive surface, you'll be able to get in touch with Nike's warranty department and they should sort you out with a replacement pair. A warranty that Nike could technically refuse with an FG pair being worn on artificial grass, because now you're using these football boots on a playing surface they were not intended for. A lot of people don't know that. Where FG or AG, these football boots are super expensive, so if something were to go wrong due to a manufacturing defect, it is well worth spending the money on the proper stud pattern so that warranty stays intact. So with that in mind, what makes these sole plates and stud patterns better suited for use on artificial grass? Where if you look across the board between the Tiempo, the Mercurial, and the Phantom 6, you'll notice that the 8 studs along the outside of the forefoot remain pretty much exactly the same in terms of position, layout, stud length, and stud shape across all 3 lines. Nothing changes. And that's because AG stud patterns are more so an exercise in managing traction rather than creating it. And what I mean by that is any studs will grip an artificial grass playing surface. It's why you see so many people using FG boots on artificial grass. It just works. It's going to cling to just about anything. But cling is really the key word, in that when you're playing on artificial grass, you never want to have too much grip, which is why they've gone for a slightly shorter stud length than what you would find in a typical FG layout, although it's not much shorter, that must be said. You'll also notice that all the studs are conical in shape, which is relatively traditional, especially on a pair of Mercurials, but that is by design in that you want that freedom to twist and pivot when your foot is planted, something that is more difficult to do in artificial grass just due to its abrasive nature. And then another signature design element of Nike's AG Pro stud patterns is going to be that cord out center, which allows the tip of the stud to flex ever so slightly, which again is there not to increase grip, but actually decrease it, in that again, you don't want the studs digging into the playing surface and getting stuck. When that happens, which is very common, especially with a bladed FG stud pattern on artificial grass, you are putting your ankles, knees, and hips at a significantly higher risk of injury. Where I guess, to make a long story short, this stud pattern isn't designed to give you as much grip as possible. It's designed to not provide too much grip, because that's when things can get dangerous. We're talking specifically about the Mercurial layout. You of course get those 8 conical studs, and then you get a very similar wave design to the bottom of the sole plate that you'll find on the FG variation, to allow for a little bit more ground contact of the sole plate itself, to allow you to feel that zoom unit underfoot slightly more. Whether or not that's actually effective is of course very difficult to say. And then under the heel, this is going to be the most aggressive, I suppose, of the AG Pro layouts from Nike, although I don't really think it makes for that much of a difference. You have 2 more conical studs at the back, and then fairly traditional blades in terms of what we're used to seeing on an FG pair of Mercs. Personally, I don't love the fact that they included any blades here on this layout, but you're truthfully never really pivoting from your heel, so I don't view it as a particularly dangerous inclusion. If we look at the stud pattern on the Tiempos, again, you're getting those 8 main studs on the edge of the forefoot, although you'll definitely notice, especially towards the tip of the toe, the studs do get a little bit shorter on the AG Pro Tiempo compared to both the Phantom 6 as well as the Merc. So if you are playing on a slightly shallower artificial grass surface, perhaps they're a little bit low on rubber pellets, this would be more of an ideal layout in that the studs just aren't as long. You get a couple mini studs in the middle, mainly as a support for the sole plate more than anything else. These aren't really providing much in the way of traction. And then your 4 conical studs, again, underneath the heel, that are relatively short compared to most FG layouts. With the AG Pro Phantom 6 layout being more or less the exact same thing, slightly shorter at the tip of the toe, 4 mini studs rather than 3, kind of in the middle of the forefoot, and then your 4 conical studs underneath the heel, kind of the middle ground between the Mercs and the Tiempo in terms of stud length, but overall very well suited for use on artificial grass. Having said that, and maybe a little bit more so in the case of the Phantoms and the Mercurials, you can get away with using these AG Pro layouts on natural grass, in the sense that they ultimately end up feeling and performing very similarly to just a more traditional football boot FG layout. Where I suppose in the case of the AG Pro Tiempos, the studs are probably a little bit shorter than you would want them to be for use on natural grass, so traction wouldn't be the best. But in the case of the Phantom 6 and the Mercs, if you don't like bladed studs in general, this would be your conical stud option for the Mercurial. And if you hate the Cyclone 360 layout on the FG version of the Phantom 6, you can do without it, going for the AG Pro version, and ultimately end up with traction that is going to be very similar to an FG pair of Tiempo Legend 10s. Something else that I really like about Nike's AG Pro options is, unlike other brands that tend to get very generic, where they make an AG Pro sole plate and stud pattern and then just put it on absolutely everything, Nike chooses to maintain the characteristics and feel of the FG models and then simply just change up the stud pattern, which I think is the right way to do it, and certainly the more expensive way to do it, where in the case of the Mercurial, you're still getting that super responsive sole plate, and you're also getting that 3/4 length zoom unit underfoot, which particularly for use on artificial grass, I think just feels really, really comfortable. Where the same can be said about the AG Pro Phantom 6 and Legend 10. Of course, these sole plates are a lot less unique than what you're going to find on the Mercurials, but if you're going from an FG pair into an AG pair, the sole plate as a whole will feel pretty much the same. One other thing to note regarding the AG variants that doesn't really apply to the Tiempos like it does with the Phantoms and the Mercurials is that the mid-cut options, while they offer no true performance benefit, like I've talked about so many times on this channel, in the case of using these boots on artificial grass, what a lot of people have found, and it's definitely true, is having this mid-cut collar kind of wrapping your ankle a little bit more closely and closing up the opening of the football boot. If you absolutely despise getting those little rubber pellets inside of your football boots that you have to dump out at the end of your playing session, having this collar with the one-piece upper construction, especially with this giant lace cover on the mid-cut, or I should say high-cut Phantom 6, that will definitely do its part in terms of helping prevent those rubber pellets from getting in your boots. And then when it comes to weight, again, something that I think Nike does better than other brands is give you a sole plate design that is very similar to that of the FG model, and then only swapping out the stud pattern, where because there are typically less studs and shorter studs, they manage to shave a little bit of weight, where all in the same size 9.5 US, you can see that the Phantom 6 High weighs in at 7.2 ounces in the AG Pro variant, the equivalent of 205 grams, which is actually 10 grams or so lighter than the FG model. Change the scale back to ounces and we'll throw on the Mercs in AG Pro, and you can see that the Superflies weigh in at 6.7 ounces, the equivalent of 190 grams, which once again is a few grams lighter, believe it or not, than the FG variant. And then of course we have the Tiempo Legend 10 Elite, which weigh in at 7.2 ounces, the equivalent of 204 grams, which is roughly the same as the FG model. In other words, if you were hesitant about the AG Pro variants because you thought they might be heavier than the FG versions, in fact, the opposite is true. The AG Pro models are actually the lightest of all the stud pattern offerings. And then when it comes to the boots on feet, like I touched on earlier, Nike does a really good job of making their different stud pattern variants feel the same as the most popular FG models, where in a perfect world, if you regularly play on both artificial and natural grass playing surfaces, ideally you would want to have one pair of each. I know that from a cost effectiveness standpoint, that's not necessarily something everybody can do, but in the situation where you were going from an FG pair to an AG pair of the exact same model, you would want them to fit and feel the same on feet, which is definitely the case with Nike's AG Pro layouts, where again, this Phantom 6 has the same sole plate as the FG model, as does this Mercurial. It has the same underfoot feel. The sole plate is of a very similar thickness. It flexes the same, and perhaps most importantly, where we do see this variation with some brands when going from FG to AG, the shaping of the upper, the fit, the volume, the width, everything is exactly the same. The only thing that changes are the studs under your feet, which would of course mean whether you're going for the Mercurials or the Phantoms or the Tiempos, the sizing, the width, all of that remains exactly the same. Where for Nike in general, across the board, personally, I would recommend going true to size, the Phantoms being the widest and the Mercurials along with the Tiempos being slightly slimmer in terms of overall profile, but in general, as long as you don't have ridiculously wide feet, you should fit into most of Nike's current top-end product. So in conclusion, if you're on the market for a new pair of Nike football boots and also regularly play on artificial grass, you 100% should be getting a pair with an AG Pro stud pattern. Where for use on artificial grass, they'll be more comfortable, should in theory last longer, and if something were to go wrong, you will have a warranty in place, and perhaps most importantly, will significantly reduce your potential risk of injury when compared to wearing an FG stud pattern on AG, and I can't believe people still do this, wearing a soft ground stud pattern on artificial grass, something that you absolutely should never do.